Hi, I'm Roy from Roy's Garage. Today I'm going to be working on a 2015 Toyota Sienna van, L model, 3.5 liter automatic. I'm going to show you how to replace the AC compressor. These are the tools I'm going to be using today to do this job. AC gauges, 3/8 ratchet, 12mm socket, 3/8 extension, 1/4" ratchet, 10mm socket. This is a 1/4" extension. This is a screwdriver type handle with a 10mm socket, cotter pin puller, water pump plier, snap ring plier, regular pliers, dielectric grease, small tip screwdriver. This is my gear wrench tool to remove the serpentine belt. This is a scale to measure the freon, pry bar, hood prop. This one measures the amount of oil I put in, and my vacuum pump. These are the parts I'm going to be using today to do this job. Okay, this is an AC compressor. I'm going to be using this brand Denso, part number 471-1017. Some compressor oil and R134A freon. Okay, so I'm going to be removing the air intake, coolant recovery tank, the upper radiator hose from the radiator, and the fan assembly. Okay, so first, two 10mm bolts. Okay, removing the coolant recovery tank. So we're going to be removing these wires for the fan. Removing this, push this clip down and pull it out. So right now I'm going to be sucking out as much antifreeze as I can, because I'm going to be disconnecting the top radiator hose, so that way not too much going to leak out. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this wire around, and I'm just going to hook it onto something just to keep my hose away, so that way I can pull out the radiator assembly. So I'm going to get two bolts we got to disconnect. Squeeze this tab together and pull it out and lift it out. It's hard to see, but there's a power steering return hose that is clipped on to this bottom of the radiator fan shaft. You just got to remove it. So the compressor is right down here. I'm going to be removing these two hoses. This is the pressure hose and this is the suction hose. have a 10mm bolt. You just unbolt it. We're going to pull it out. Okay. So I'm going to get some masking tape. I'm going to tape it around so that the moisture doesn't go into the system. Okay, and disconnect the other side. Now we're going to cover up the hole with some tape. So there's a few electrical wires that we can disconnect. One here. Another one right here. This is tough. There's another connector over here. Kind of hard to see, but so I'm gonna be removing this plastic cover and this mount right here on this wire harness. I'm just gonna be removing it. Just so that when I take the compressor out, you know, I can I have a little bit more wire that I can kind of move around. Okay, so now we're going to go underneath the vehicle. So I'm going to be removing the passenger front tire. So I'm going to be removing this plastic shield. Okay, so I'm going to be removing the serpentine belt. There's a automatic adjuster I have to slack in order to take the belt off. So this is the automatic S-belt tensioner. I'm going to have to loosen it to remove the belt. So I'm going to disconnect the wire that goes to the oil pressure sending unit. Right here. So now we're back at the top. There is 4 bolts that bolt the compressor to the engine. So there's going to have 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. So the 2 on the top, one is going to be right here. And the other one is going to be right under the alternator. The one under the alternator, you got to go by feel. Okay, so I'm going to be removing this plastic shield to get access to the compressor from the bottom. Prying off these grommets. So we're underneath of the car. We're going to be removing these two bolts on the bottom of the compressor, one here and one here. We're going to be using a 12mm socket. So now we're going to go back onto the top. So with a 12mm socket and a short extension, removing the two top bolts. Kind of gotta go by feel. Okay, so we're gonna be removing this compressor from the top. So I'm gonna be pulling it towards the front. It has to clear these studs on the top. So this is the new compressor. This compressor doesn't come with oil, so I'm gonna have to add some oil in it. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna be removing these two bolts and removing these two plugs, because right now this system is in a vacuum. So I want to pull these plugs out first. Then I'm gonna be removing this snap ring, and I'm gonna be pulling this sensor out. And I'm gonna be adding my oil in to this sensor. So I'm gonna be removing this sensor. You gotta look where these little prongs are facing, and then you put the sensor back the same way. So I'm gonna get a towel, put it right around the sensor. I'm gonna get one plier, grab it. Don't grab it too hard, and just kind of wiggle it around and kind of pull it out at the same time. Just be careful. So now we're going to be adding some oil in here. So on this one, I'm going to be putting around 4 ounces of oil. So I'm going to be adding it in. And at the same time, I'm going to be turning my compressor, trying to get this oil to go in. So I'll be putting back my sensor, putting on my snap ring, putting these plugs back on. So now we're going to install the compressor. So I'm going to be putting in this compressor. On the block, there's going to have 2 studs or bolts that's sticking out of the block. So those 2 bolts got to go through here. You got to slide it on through here. So however you took it out, that's how you're going to put it back in. So I'm going to be putting these 2 nuts on the top. So we're going to go on the bottom and put the 2 bolts on the bottom. So we're under the vehicle. I'm going to be putting the 2 bolts on the bottom of the compressor. So we're going to tighten it up. Okay, so we're going to go on the top and tighten the top bolts. So I'm going to be tightening up the two top bolts on the compressor. So I'm going to be installing the electrical connectors, putting in some dielectric grease. Okay, so we're going to be connecting these guys. Okay, so we can put this covering on. So now we're going to be connecting these hoses. So what I'm going to do is take the tape off, and I'm going to replace the O-rings with new O-rings that came in the kit. So I'm going to be removing this tape. I'm going to be replacing this O-ring. Okay, so I'll be putting on these new O-rings. There's two sizes come in the kit, the large one and the small one. The return with the bigger hose is the large O-ring, and the pressure side is going to be the smaller O-ring. So now what I'm going to do is put a little bit of compressor oil, AC compressor oil. Just put it around the seal so that way it slides in. So I'm going to be removing my plug. I'm going to be putting in this guy. Slip it in and put the bolt on. Can this guy take off the tape? Take off the old O-ring. Put the new one on. Put some compressor oil. And slide it in. And bolt it up. Tighten it up. Okay, so I'm going to be putting on this oil pressure sending unit, the wire. I'll be putting on some dielectric first. Put the covering on. Now I'm going to be putting on my serpentine belt. So make sure your belts are on all the pulleys. Now we're going to be loosening the tensioner. So now Make sure all your belts are on the pulley, on all the pulleys. Make sure it's not crooked. Okay, so we're going to be putting on this plastic covering. Okay, so we're going to put the tire back on. So I'm going to be putting on the tire. With my pry bar, I'm going to lift it up. Okay, so we're going to be putting on this plastic shield. So we're going to be installing the fan. Got to make sure the bottom tabs are in the groove. Okay, we're going to bolt it up. We're going to be connecting the trans cooler hose. Okay. So we're going to be putting on the coolant reservoir. Okay, I'm going to be collecting these electrical wires for the fan. Put some dielectric grease. Clip it on. Connecting the upper radiator hose to the radiator. Putting on the air intake. Okay, bolting this guy down. Connecting all these vacuum hoses. Okay, so I'm going to be filling up my radiator with antifreeze. Okay, this is my AC gauge. Right now I hooked up my vacuum pump to the system, so I'm going to be drawing a vacuum. So we can let this thing run about maybe half an hour or so. So right now the system is going into a vacuum. What's happening is we're boiling out the moisture, taking out all the moisture from the system. So once the moisture is removed, then we can shut it off and then charge it. Okay, so I vacuum out the system, so now I'm going to charge it up. So I'm going to be adding some freon in as a gas. So I'm going to turn the bottle of freon upside down. So I'm going to be charging it as a liquid now. So I'm going to start up the engine. I'm going to be adding in freon. Okay, I'm going to be revving up the engine maybe around 1500 RPM. And I'm going to be checking my gauge, and maybe I got to add in a little bit more. I'm going to be adding a little more freon. Pressure is all good. Now we're going to be disconnecting the gauges. So that's how you replace an AC compressor. If you have any questions, comment below. And if this is the first time watching my video, please subscribe, give me the thumbs up, and I see you in the next video. Aloha.